Beautiful. Okay. So I wanted to start that although this is a Zoom event, I wanted to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on. So I'm currently on the unsurrendered and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And they are the people that have lived on this land since time immemorial. And I am grateful to be here. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to our speakers and thank you to everybody who is in attendance for spending your time with us tonight. My name is Gerline. I'm one of the co-presidents of the BSW Student Society. Daniela is my other co-president and she is also the co-president. So I'm going to just get started. We do have a lot of questions that we want to get through about our speakers. So I'm just going to hand it off to them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you into the program. So if we can start with the first person that's on my screen here is Stephen. So we'll just go with that.
Yeah, so my name is Stephen. I am also in Ottawa. I am doing my master's in social work at the University of Windsor. I did my bachelor's of social work at Carleton, so I'm a Carleton alum. Probably about 10 years ago, so I took quite a break. Not that I didn't like academia, but I needed a bit of a break. I did my undergrad while working pretty much full-time. I did full-time school, full-time work, and that is basically what I am up to now. University of Windsor has a bit of a unique program where I'm actually on Zoom Friday from 3:30 to 9, and during the day on Saturday, there's roughly 25 people in my cohort, like my class. So it's very similar to this actually. And instead of like showing up to school for one lecture at a time, we'll do about 5 in 2 days. Pretty intense weekend, Friday and Saturday, but usually there's a week off in between where it's like asynchronous learning. So yeah, that's me. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thank you for being here. And then, so I guess we'll just go in order. Rachelle, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rachelle. My pronouns are she, her. So I did my undergrad at McGill, also did my Master of Social Work at McGill. So not as interesting as Stephen, who mixed it up. And right now I am working, but if someone had the opportunity to do their MSW part-time, I'd love to hear about that because that was not an option during my time.
Perfect. Thank you for spending your time with us, Rachelle. And then we'll just go to Thomas next and we'll just keep that order.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom. I'm currently studying at the Factor and Montage Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto. It's a 1-year advanced standing program. There's also a 2-year program for people who don't have their Bachelor of Social Work. And for my program, you pick a specialization. So the field of study that I'm in is working with children and their families. And it's a 2-day a week in class, 3 days a week in practicum. And it's actually a 10-month program. You can choose between using 8 months or 10 months. And so I should be done either in April or in July, depending on the course load I want to cut out for myself for the rest of the program.
Okay, thank you guys so much for being here and for introducing yourselves. The second question we have for you is what inspired you to pursue grad school? So in particular, what led you to attend the school of your choice? So we can start with, I think we started with, who did we start with last time? Steve.
Steve.
Yeah, so I wasn't actually going to apply for grad school. It wasn't something I was incredibly interested in, but I took a couple of weeks off from my job, and it was like you have to apply to these things quite early, and I took a browse through the universities. I had two kind of things that I needed. I actually didn't know any of my professors from Carleton. I just wasn't the kind of person that spent a lot of time like after hours or like helping the professors with like research or anything. Truthfully, I worked full time. I was exhausted. I just like submitted my assignments and learned as much as I could. There wasn't a lot of time to hang out at Carleton. So I didn't actually know any of my professors there. So that was a problem. I didn't really want to ask them for a reference if they didn't know me and I didn't know them. It's slightly awkward. University of Windsor, if you are out of school for I think 5 years, they actually allow you to just get an extra workplace reference from like a boss or something. So that's what I did. And then I needed something that I could fit in my full-time work. So I basically chose University of Windsor because it is virtual and it fits with my schedule. That and I probably wasn't ever going to ask a professor. I didn't know and they didn't know me for a reference. So I actually got to skip that process. So that's kind of what led me down the path I am now.
Thank you. Rachelle, go ahead.
So actually, I had graduated from my undergrad and then worked in the field for a bit. And then at that point, I knew that I wanted to go back to school. So I actually applied to the Joint Law and Master of Social Work program at McGill and was fortunate enough to be admitted to both faculties because even though it's a joint program, you have to apply to both separately. So that's kind of what inspired me to choose McGill because they had that offering. But also, I wanted to be close to family. And so I'm from Montreal. And so going to McGill enabled me to do that. There is another school, another university that's well known, Concordia University. However, they don't have a department of social work, unfortunately. And I say that because they tend to be a little bit more liberal in their teachings and progressive, whereas I think McGill is more for people who want to work in a clinical setting. That's what I would say. That's the kind of training that you're getting. So for someone who wants to work in a CLSC or a hospital, I would definitely recommend going there because their courses are very much preparing you for that kind of work. And I guess that's it for that question.
For Tom, just to repeat the question, what inspired you to pursue grad school? And in particular, what led you to your school of choice?
Sure. So for me, I don't think I mentioned it before, but I did my bachelor degree at Carleton as well. And the Carleton School of Social Work with the structural lens was a great starting point for me, but really what kind of drew me to the field was like doing clinical work. I'm really drawn to like clinical therapy. So for me, I was kind of hoping for an opportunity to broaden kind of my scope of practice and also like learn some kind of more advanced clinical skills related to what I wanted to do. And the program at U of T, some of the practicum options were really consequential for me and being able to really gain those clinical skills. So that's kind of what drew me to this program in particular, was like the wide variety of practicum options, basically with the whole GTA available to you in terms of clinical placements. And then also the ability to specialize as well was really important to me. So doing work with children and their families is kind of the demographic that I wanted to work with in a clinical setting. And the U of T is kind of unique in that you can choose a specialization. There's a variety of other ones as well. There's mental health, gerontology, social justice and diversity, and human services leadership and management as well. So the specialization, the practicum options, and then a clinical focus.
All right, really interesting contrast between people's programs there. So in your personal experience, what was the most challenging part of applying to the master's program? And then in contrast, what was the smoothest or easiest part of applying?
I would say for me, it wasn't overly complicated to apply to school, but you do need to have references that are, so you have to have people that are going to write your reference, and it's not sufficient that they just write it on a piece of paper and hand it to you in an envelope and you mail it in. It's all electronic. So I guess the complicated part was you have to basically walk your reference through how they're going to do it. And you have to assume that they've done it. They might say like, yeah, I submitted it, but you won't, you'll get an email like a day later saying that something's been submitted, but you don't really know what they wrote, and you don't know if they wrote exactly what the criteria were. You hope that they did. So that was probably not challenging, but that was probably the most like nerve-wracking part. You wanted to make sure that what they wrote was, of high quality, and you wanted to make sure that it really reflected, you and your values, stuff like that. So that was the not challenging part, but the nerve-wracking part. Probably the smoothest part was, my school, they just give you a checklist of things that you have to do. So just working through them one at a time. Nothing overly complicated, but I would say to people to not wait until the last minute. I know one of my references was a little slow. I mean, he's senior management at my workplace. It's a pretty large workplace. So I think I gave him like a week to write a reference, and he submitted it the day before it was due, or the day of that it was due. So you just want to give people lots of time to write the documents. I'm sure if you reach out to a professor, they probably appreciate some time as well. They're probably getting lots of requests. So yeah, I guess that would be my thing. It's not overly complicated, but just give yourself lots of time.
Absolutely, that's really important. Good advice. Rachelle?
Yeah, I agree with what Stephen said in relation to the reference letters. If you can get to know your professors ahead of time and have them write something that's a lot more personal that can make you shine, that's definitely something that I would recommend. In terms of the thing that was the hardest, I would say, was really nailing down what I wanted to convey in my personal statement. I would recommend, so Stephen recommended giving your references or your referees time to really write a good letter. I would recommend giving yourself that same amount of time just to make sure that it's sharp, it's concise, it's clear, it's pristine, because you have to remember that that's going to be their first impression of you. And if you're going to a school that has a high volume of applications, they're looking to weed out people on no matter what. So it could be something as small as a typo, or if you're doing a bunch of applications, it could be that you forgot to change the university at the top, So I feel like if they're having to make hard choices, that's going to be one of the ways in which they lessen the applications that they have. I guess I would agree as well. I was thinking about this question earlier, and I was like, I don't know if there was something that was smooth, but I too think it was helpful to have a checklist. And at McGill, once a document is uploaded, it'll have the name of the document and a check by it, or it'll say like received, pending, or whatever. So it was nice to know like, okay, my referee got it in on time, or it was nice to know that if I uploaded it, the system had accepted it. And it wasn't going to be a thing where I didn't know that I failed to submit something.
Yeah, and I would echo sort of what Stephen and Rachelle have said. I think the two most important things are making sure that you have your references as far in advance as possible to give people time, especially in the field. People are working full time on top of being teachers, and it's difficult to really nail down those references if you haven't done so at an early date. The other thing too is with the statement of interest or the statement of purpose, depending on where you're applying to, give yourself like more time than you think you need, because it can be a little bit anxiety inducing having to essentially sell yourself in a way that's going to promote your social work identity and also give you an opportunity to make the case for why you would be a good fit for that school. So read it in advance, give yourself some time to let it marinate in terms of like the instructions for whatever statement you're going to write. And then I found it helpful as well to have somebody look over what I had written and provide me feedback. But But yeah, if it boils down to one piece of advice, I would say the best thing that you can do is just give yourself more time than you think you need.
I'm also writing down things because like I haven't applied yet, and this is also helpful for me for when I do apply. So we're just gonna switch a little bit and talk a little bit more about what the MSW is like in terms of actually being there. So how has your experience been in the MSW program? How is the program different from what you expected? And if so, in what ways?
I'd say the program, for people thinking like it's really complicated or really tough, it's not. I would say the volume of work is more, but it's no easier or harder than undergrad. I would say it's really important to not do things at the last minute. I find in grad school, like the volume of reading is enormous or quite high. So you want to be like spending a couple hours each night, just like going through your assignments. You definitely want to read that course syllabus over and over and over again. It's basically you find new things in it all the time, and you don't want to be the person that is constantly asking the professor like, how do you do your homework? So like it's all there, but you really got to spend time each night doing your homework, writing your papers. I would honestly suggest investing in Grammarly Premium. It really like helps take out those typos and make sentences, like when you're on like at a higher page for an essay, you want to make sure that each sentence is like crisp and is said as concisely as possible. You want to make sure that all the information is in there. So yeah, I would say that you probably aren't going to have any tests I don't really have any tests. I haven't had any tests yet. Less tests, more papers. So if you are better at papers, you are in luck. If you aren't great at writing essays, there's actually tons of resources, usually at most universities, that can help you write a good essay. We have like a writing, it's like basically like a writing school at the University of Windsor, where you can sit down with them, I think twice a semester, and and you could upload your paper to them, and they will give you feedback on your paper, how to make it better. They will go through your references. References is another thing you'll need to get really good at, APA 7, if you do it soon. So that's what I would say. The volume is more, it's not harder, but you will have to get really good at writing a good paper.
Grammarly is like my holy grail. Like anytime anybody is like, how to write a good paper, Grammarly, get Grammarly. That's like, I will be the biggest advocate for Grammarly. They're a really, really good source. Rachelle, but so can you talk to us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, I think my experience is a bit different. So in the joint program that I was talking about at McGill, so the law and the Master of Social Work, your first year is actually all law classes. So I didn't start fully my Master of Social Work until my second year. And I would agree that the volume is different. I think also what was a stark difference for me was that during my undergrad, I was in classes of about, I would say 60 people. And then during my MSW, I was in classes of about usually 10 or less. One class we were 6. And I thought that was interesting because then it kind of turned into a dynamic where we're more learning from each other's lived experiences, our different takes on the readings that we did the night before, and kind of just relating our, also our work experiences, right, to the material that was assigned. So that was something that was interesting because I felt like my intellectual curiosity had to be a little bit more at this level than it had to be at the undergrad level. Another thing that I would say is, maybe this is bad advice, but when you see your syllabus and you see your assignments, be very strategic in terms of reading, because it's just too much. Like, you're going to get so many reading assignments, and yeah, like if your program is like mine, you're also doing stage 2 times a day. I know some people, 2 times a week. I know some people were doing it 3 times a week, and you got to take care of yourself. And so I was trying to be very systematic in the way that I try to pinpoint what topics were being covered throughout the syllabus and what readings I felt like attached most to those topics and also attached to the assignments that we were going to be having to submit, and really getting a good understanding of those readings and more doing a deep dive rather than, you know, trying to skim through all of these readings just to say that I did.
Yeah, and that's a really good strategy too. I find like even in undergrad, like I think the workload that you would have in master's is a lot more, but you still get like a lot of readings in undergrad. And so you have to be like really strategic about which ones you'll read, if you'll even read them and stuff like that too. Can you explain what stage is? Sorry, I don't know what that is.
Oh, sorry. I think that's actually a French word and it just means internship. So yeah, anybody, if I say something, so we make a joke in Montreal that we speak like franglais, which is like French English, because some of the words we just like interchange them. So if that ever happens again, just like knock me or like raise a hand or whatever, because I do tend to do that. So thanks for asking.
Okay, perfect. I thought it was like a legal term, but okay.
No, it just means like your internship.
Okay, perfect. Tom, can you talk to us about your experience?
Sure. Yeah, I think I would echo some of what I heard from Rachelle in terms of having to triage your readings a little bit. They do assign quite a lot of readings, and some professors will be a little more heavy-handed with the reading list than others. And so you do have to kind of, I think at the beginning of the term, everyone has the experience of like trying to read everything, and quickly that falls by the wayside as assignments become due. And it is a very busy program. For mine in particular, with an advanced standing one-year program, they cram a heck of a lot into 1 year. And so I find, you know, being very, very systematic about, you know, managing your time in terms of what needs to happen on a given day, rather than, you know, catching up on readings that might not necessarily be necessary for the finals. That's kind of something that came with experience in the program as you start to sort of figure out what is and what is not relevant for whichever assignment you're doing. So yeah, I think one thing that really stuck out for me just on that same wavelength is just the time management that you really have to use, especially in an advanced standing program, but in any master's, I'm sure it can be a lot, especially if you're, you know, working on top of doing a practicum, on top of doing coursework, it can become quite a lot. So time management is one thing that's like constantly something that I'm trying to improve on. And I think that might have been like the biggest shock coming out of the bachelor was, you know, now competing at a different level. It's there is quite a lot that needs to get done, and it can be a lot to manage. So making sure you have time not only for your assignments, not only for your practicum, not only for your work, but also like for yourself outside of those hours is definitely important.
Absolutely. Really, really good advice. So speaking to, I guess, reflecting on your experiences, in hindsight, what is something that you would change about the way that you either approach the application process or your beginning kind of starting off experiences initially in the program? So we'll start with Stephen.
So I don't know if I would have changed anything for the application process. It went reasonably smooth. There wasn't any hiccups along the way. Interesting that we touched on the subject of kind of not reading all the material, because I actually agree with that wholeheartedly. I just didn't know if everybody shared that same experience. So I would say, I mean, I started in September in the advanced standing as well. So I'm just starting to get the hang of it now, but certainly you want to prioritize your time. You aren't going to get through all the readings. I'm not even sure why we would try at this point. And some are just really boring readings, and skimming them at best is probably sufficient. I would also say that there's a lot of like, if you're doing something virtually, there's going to be a lot of breakout rooms. If you're only like a cohort of like 4 in a breakout room, you're going to want to know some of the material because you'll have to present back to the class. So really important to figure out, listen to what the professor's saying, get that feeling for the first couple of weeks. You'll know pretty quickly the stuff that you need to know and the stuff that you might not need to know. And if you have like a paper due and a whole bunch of readings, well, what paper best reflects which readings best reflect the paper that you're going to write? Maybe just focus on those. I would also say something else is that people are incredibly nice. And well, I think I've talked to a lot of master's students. I think the cohort that you're with will become like your new friends. So I don't ever feel like I'm in this alone, as much as it's like you're definitely, and it's not really a competition. Like, at least in my class, we all have each other on WhatsApp, and this is not a competition at all. We are really there to help each other. We're super nice people. If anybody's like, we jump on a Zoom call all the time and just like go through our assignment. Like, is this what? So we do individual work, but we do it. It's like we do it some together as well, and we also a lot of group work, and I find in Masters of Social Work, or at least in my program. So get comfortable with writing papers and doing presentations with people.
Amazing, yeah. It's really interesting. Rachelle, in hindsight, is there something you would change either about your application process or about those early days when you started the MSW program?
I think one of the things that I would change, and I think it goes for the undergrad as well, I wish I had spoken to more people about the program. I found out about the Carleton program and how it's more grassroots and there's more organizing, because I had actually met someone in Yukon actually who was telling me about their program. And I was just thinking to myself, oh man, like I wish I had gone there. So I wish I had really taken the time to look at the different programs, to talk to people. That's actually how Daniela and I met, because Daniela was asking about my experiences at McGill, because I do think that with my personality and my work experience, I do lend more towards a program like Carleton more than a program like McGill. But at the same time, I did want to stay home. So that is kind of a balancing act. But I guess my advice would be try your hardest to get a sense of what you're getting yourself into. But that's easier said than done, right? So.
Definitely. Yeah. And Tom, if you wanted to speak to kind of anything that you would change.
Yeah, I think I would probably have given myself a little bit more time for my applications. I applied to 3 schools when I did my applications, and between the 3 of them, writing 3 separate statements of interest, it was quite a lot on top of the regular assignments that are due in November, December. So I definitely would have given myself more time for that, because that would have probably helped me feel a little bit better about them at the end. It did work out all right, but definitely more time would have helped. In terms of like the beginning of the program, U of T, if you're interested in going there, has an advanced practice seminar that occurs right before the start of the term. It's only a two-day workshop, but it's a great opportunity to like meet your classmates, to learn a little bit beforehand. And also there's a simulation component as well. So you can actually like practice some of your social work skills. It's particularly effective. I think the reason they made it was for students who were like just coming back to do their master's, who had been out of school for a few years. But even for me, who was right out of my undergrad, it was a great opportunity to like meet everybody, to learn, how to get around on campus, and to just kind of get over that hump of, getting back into the swing of school. So that was very, very helpful to me. And I'd highly recommend doing that if you do choose to apply to U of T. And my cat agrees.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think like just having all of your perspectives is very helpful to me, at least. I'm hoping that you guys are taking something away from this, whether it's like about the application process or the way that you should approach while you're in the master's as well. We did have a last question, but I think we're going to save that question 6 until the very, very end, because I feel like it's a good ending question. In our registration form, we had given room for students to ask questions that they had about for you. So if anybody has any other questions that they want to ask, they can pop it in the chat. But for now, we'll be talking about the questions that other students had asked in that registration form. So the first question was, how did you get the required amount of hours for experience?
For me, I worked during undergrad and I worked after undergrad for probably 10 years before I registered for grad school. So to me, that was actually probably the part that kind of like set my application apart, maybe, is that I had a lot of work experience. I wouldn't say like my grades were good too, but here's what I would say about the MSW programs across Ontario. A- is probably what they're going for now. They have lots of applications. So I would just say like get work experience. In this environment right now, people are hiring like crazy. Even if you're not working full time, or if it's not the pay that you want, you can go get some fun experience and then put things on your resume. Then you could also put it on your grad school application. So just apply places and get the work experience.
Thank you. Rachelle, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't realize that until Stephen mentioned it and the question was posed, but I too worked for about a little under 2 years before I sent in my application. So the hours, I guess it shows now, was really not something that I had thought about. And I'm someone who has kind of always been involved in their community. So even besides working, I also had some volunteer experience, I think, that lended towards the application process.
Yeah, I think that we also forget that like volunteering also counts towards your hours. So if you aren't able to work, then like also get volunteer experience as well. And I feel like volunteer just allows you to explore a lot more of the field. So like for work, you'd obviously have to like have them want to hire you. But like if you volunteer somewhere, like you can get a sense of where that place is and if that's a good fit for you or not as well. Tom, go ahead.
So right out of my Bachelor of Social Work, I was working part-time in the field, but I actually didn't have any like real quantifiable work experience outside of my practicums and like part-time work for a few months. But the U of T program recommends that you have work experience, but it's not a requirement for admission. So as long as you have a strong personal statement, a strong academic record, and quality references, those other things can strengthen your application, even if you're lacking that work experience. And I know when I was applying to other schools as well, there are some schools that, just like U of T, will recommend it. There are other schools where it's mandatory. So I'd encourage you to look, if you're curious about applying at different places, check the admissions requirements very thoroughly. And if you have a question about it, reach out to the graduate department of that school, which I did for a couple of the schools that I was interested in as well, because even though some places might say, you know, required 2 years of work experience, if you call and you ask, they might say, well, you know, you can still apply, there might still be a position. So U of T is a good option for that in that way, because if you're coming right out of school and you don't have that work experience, it's still worth applying.
Absolutely. So just another question that we had was, do you need an academic supervisor? So I'm guessing, just asking about that requirement per se.
I don't need an academic supervisor, no. At a PhD level, you need something like that, but I certainly don't. No.
I had one. I don't know if supervisor and advisor is the same thing, but I had one on the Master of Social Work side, and then I had one on the law side. So I was meeting with both of them. And I also had to do a individual study project. And so it had to touch on both social work and law. So I think having an advisor on both sides was nice, just to make sure that both topics were properly included, I guess, in the project, but also it was nice to have someone to bounce ideas off of, or someone to be like, have you thought about this? Have you looked at this? Your paper would be stronger if you considered this. So that was good. And I think also it was especially helpful because I used my, I'm just going to call it an ISP now. I used my ISP to support a community organization that was doing work around racial profiling. So it was nice to have their academic minds just to make sure that the paper would be, one, as accessible as possible, but also to be able to really benefit the youth that the community organization was working with to really get the information that they would need in that document, and just to make sure that it was really, I was really hitting all the bases in terms of making it a tool for the youth.
And Tom, if you could speak to whether there was an academic supervisor requirement or advisors or anything.
Yeah, so there's no academic supervisor at U of T. You do have a field supervisor when you're in the practicum, and you will have like an academic advisor that's accessible to you. And really there's a lot of insulation in terms of like faculty that you can reach out to for anything. The teachers, I was shocked at, they're very accessible, very, very accessible. After class, before class, by email, they're very, very approachable. So you don't necessarily have one person supervising you, but you're very insulated with a team of faculty.
Okay, so we're gonna do about 2 more questions from just the list we have, and then we'll turn to the chat and see if anybody has questions there. I think I already saw 2 questions. So if you do have more questions, you can put them in the chat. We will try to go over as many as possible. But for right now, while we wait for other people to think of questions, I think this question might be a little bit more pushed towards Rachelle, but was there any challenges or benefits of doing your MSW and BSW in the same school? You can take a second to think about it.
It's a good question, and please come back to me. I'm going to take some time to think about an appropriate answer instead of just blurting out the first thing that comes to my mind.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Even Tom, do you have any thoughts about this? Would you prefer to go to the same school as your undergrad, or do you think that having that leeway to explore a different type of school environment was beneficial for you?
I would have liked probably to stay at Carleton. I live in Ottawa, but I think it's also really important you have to balance what you have on your plate already, and you have to pick a school that can basically accommodate your schedule. So if I didn't work full time, I probably would have applied to Carleton, but to me, it wasn't an option. I'm in my 30s now. I don't really want to take on debts, just like personal decisions. So I would have liked to stay at Carleton, but University of Windsor is just much more, it fits with my schedule really well. So that's why I chose it. So I think that's probably going to be a factor for folks as well. Now that the world is partially online, there is more options, and you don't necessarily have to pick a school that is in your backyard. You can pick one from across Ontario, or I suppose even across Canada, based on what you have on your plate.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying there, Stephen. But I also think that, you know, if one benefit of doing your undergrad and your MSW at 2 different places is you're going to get a different lens, a different social work lens at a different school. So that can have the effect of kind of complementing each other, developing, you know, a really like a holistic kind of understanding of different lenses of looking at social work. So that's one thing that I found helpful. That being said, having moved to Toronto, I recognize that, you know, moving cities for some people is not possible and is not great. I had lived in Ottawa for my whole life and was ready for a change. So had I not moved to Toronto, I probably would have moved somewhere else, to be perfectly honest. So it's good if you can do it. And if you can't, you're not going to miss out on too much in the sense that like Carleton still has a great MSW program. You don't need to do your master's somewhere else to have a good experience, but certainly it can open up different perspectives with a different etiology, different philosophy at a different school.
I agree with that, actually. That's yeah, really well said. Carleton has the structural school of social work. You'll learn lots of, I mean, if everybody here is from Carleton, you know what I'm talking about. But then you go to a different school and they don't have it. Maybe they're, you know, they have different theories that they teach, different ways of looking at life situations. So to echo what Tom said, you could actually get probably more like rich learning environment, learning about different ways to analyze a situation by picking two different schools. And also, I think that the biggest difference for MSW and BSW, I don't remember the undergrad professors being so helpful. And I'm not suggesting they weren't, but maybe they just had so many students and there's lots of like TAs and stuff. I haven't come across a TA yet. The professor is the one that teaches the class. She's the one, or he or she, or they are the one that mark the assignments. They're the ones that respond to the emails. They're the ones that meet with you before, after class. You could set up a meeting anytime. Basically, my professor has laid out her schedule, like fit yourself into a time slot. So I have a feeling lots of MSW programs are have professors at small classes and really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the main critiques of Carleton being like a structural school is that it's purely structural, and then students don't really get a sense of what clinical teaching is like. So if you're sick of structural learning, I think like looking at other schools as well, because structural is not the only lens that you can look at social work through. Rachelle, have you thought about your answer, or should we come back to you?
Yeah, I like what Tom said in terms of being in a, like getting the opportunity to see things through a different lens. I think even for people working with certain communities, right? The way that those communities operate in Montreal could be very different in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, where have you. And I think going to a different school, like Tom says, enables you to kind of have that perspective where you can compare. So I just like to echo that. I think in terms of going to the same school, you kind of have a little bit of a comfort zone. So you're not necessarily going into this whole new place where like, you don't know where the bathroom is, or, you know, you don't know where the cafeteria is, kind of thing. So that's nice. And I think you also have a baseline, because I feel like you'll start to, probably you've experienced this in your undergrad, but you kind of get an idea of how things work, right? And so at the master's level, of course, there are complexities, but you have that baseline understanding of how things work and what's expected of you. And I think that that might be one of the benefits of staying at the same school for both your BSW and your MSW. And also you've made relationships with people. So if you're doing them back to back, you might have some of the same people in your MSW cohort that you had in your Bachelor of Social Work cohort. And then you might have some professors that you really got along with, or you really enjoyed their lectures, and they're lecturing at both levels. So I guess those would be the two benefits that I can think of off the top of my head.
Absolutely, thank you. We're going to go into the chat. We've got a couple questions here, so I would like to get to everybody's, hopefully. So it was briefly touched on earlier, but are there any specific tips for a good personal statement on an application?
I can jump into this one, if that's okay. So what I've learned from writing a few applications now is you want to answer why that school, why that program, and why should they choose you? So why Rachelle? And I think that if you're able to answer those three questions in a succinct way that still shows some depth, I think you'll be okay. Because on the other side, they want to know, like, why should we elect this person into this program and this profession? Like, what are they going to contribute? But then also, what are they bringing to the classroom? Which kind of answers the question about why you, right? And then in terms of the school, you have to flatter them just a little bit in terms of like them picking you. I know it's a bit like cheesy, but that's just the way it goes.
No, that's totally fair. It's kind of the name of the game, right? So if Stephen or Tom has anything to add to that.
I actually don't really have any good, honest, like feedback for it. I applied to one school and I got in and I actually can't remember what I wrote. So respectfully, I'll pass. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll quickly add to it. I agree with everything Rachelle said. I thought it was well put. The other thing that I found was helpful, specifically at U of T. I'm not sure if it's like this at other places, but what they're hoping to gain, what I learned that they're hoping to gain from the personal statement is like really a sense of your social work identity. So like what values you bring to the social work profession that you're able to articulate in a way that's going to be congruent with the philosophies of the school. So like finding a way to like, you know, reflect on what's important to you about the profession, why you're drawn to the profession, and what skills you possess that will make you like an asset to the school and to the profession.
Yeah, Rachelle, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing, just to be more concrete in the answer. In terms of when you answer like, why this school, if they boast about having some special feature about their program, you need to put that, sorry, I shouldn't tell you what you need to do, but I would recommend you put that in your personal letter, your letter of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good advice, especially like if for the focusing on the school part, you want to like, it's like a job application, you know, like they'll ask you, oh, why are you interested in this company? You know, like you want to know that you have some sort of understanding of what they do and how you could really benefit to that as well. I haven't written one, don't take my word for it. I'm just developing. Okay, so there's another question in the chat. It's a bit lengthy, so let me read it slowly. How was all of your experiences with your programs acknowledging the harm that the social work profession had perpetuated in terms of things like white supremacy, white savior complex, criminalization or exploitation of vulnerable communities? How do you find the program for BIPOC students? So this is open to anyone.
I mean, I can briefly answer that. I mean, as a white man in my program, it's hard for me to really give a stance on the program, how it is for BIPOC students. But that being said, it is inclusive in the sense that there's a significant proportion of the students in my program are international students. There are many people of color. Additionally, there's actually a program within the U of T Faculty of Social Work called the Indigenous Trauma and Resiliency program. It's a specific field of study within the Faculty of Social Work. It's a 2-year program. So that is an option as well. If you identify as an Indigenous person, it's a really, really cool program. And even if you don't, it's a really, really awesome opportunity. In terms of acknowledging the harm, I think a lot of the work that is done at the master's level is very mindful of the history of the social work profession, and I think Carleton maybe with the structural lens takes a more in-depth approach at that, but it's very like the teachings are done in a way that's very mindful of the harm that has been done, and the way that it's very intentional, the way that we try and work with communities to prevent further harming.
Thank you for that response. Stephen, Rachelle, floor is open for either of you to speak.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to say about this answer either. I have a small, we have about 25 people in my cohort. I would say we're a very inclusive group. We make up all walks of life, male, female, trans. people of color, Indigenous. So we have we're quite a diverse group, and I think the teaching is done from a very inclusive mindset. I don't think anybody feels oppressed coming to class in any way, but I can't speak for everybody. But they do a very good job of making sure that it's a very inclusive environment.
Are we going to stop the recording for this answer? No, I'm kidding. I appreciate this question. I really do. I would have to say that in my experience, at least, it was a mixed bag. There were some professors, kind of like what Tom said, were very intentional about talking about these things, about sharing their own experiences, which I really appreciated, because it helped to foster discussion from everyone in the class, right? But there were also some professors where us as students had to really push back. And sometimes it was received and sometimes it was not well received. And I am thinking of one situation in particular where we corrected this professor and we thought that it was understood. And then a few months later, or maybe a month later, we ran into the same issue again in relation to communities of color and how the professor was characterizing those communities, especially in addition to Indigenous people. And sorry, I'm like reliving this, but it can be very difficult, and it could be a very difficult line to walk, because you know that this person is going to be grading your assignments, right? And in my opinion, at least compared to math, social work can be sometimes very subjective in terms of corrections. But at the same time, if nothing is done, things will stay the same. So, I mean, that's definitely something to keep in mind. If anybody is applying to McGill, then we can talk. And I'll tell you, anyway, we'll talk if you decide that. But I don't want to cast a shadow or a dark lens on those professors who are really trying to work on having those open discussions and work on themselves, because we're all always working on ourselves. And I think that that's an important part of social work itself, accepting that we can be hurt, but we can also be someone to hurt someone else. So yeah. But I appreciate this question. I really do.
No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experience, Rachelle. I also appreciate this question. I think that we have to have real conversations about these kinds of things. And I think that opening up the floor to have more of those is really important. Shifting gears a little bit, any advice for students who are not from the BSW and are applying to the 2-year master's program?
I would just say you're kind of at a unique sort of advantage in terms of the statement of purpose, because, you know, rather than having to sell your identity as a social worker a little bit, you can kind of talk about what's drawing you to the profession, right? You're making an intentional choice to shift gears from an undergrad that you took into social work. So there, it might even be a little bit easier just articulating, you know, why you want to be a social worker. The other thing I would say is, if you're applying to the 2-year program, just I would do some work in advance, like if you can in the final year of your undergrad, doing some projects that are within a lens of social work, within a social justice lens. Take some social work electives if you can. I know you might be too late for that already, but just to sort of get your feet wet, get the ball rolling, because it will be helpful to you when you start.
Stephen and Rachelle, if you've got anything to add there.
I did my bachelor's of social work and then the master's, so I can't relate to the 2-year program. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Tom covered everything. I can't really think of anything to add.
Okay, well, thank you, Tom, for that. I hope that was helpful to the person who had that question. For our next question, so for programs that require an academic advisor, do you need to contact the professor before you apply, or are they assigned to you? Can you go to McGill and do a practicum in English? I think those are 2 different questions.
So I guess this one's for me. So I did not speak to the advisor prior. I looked at all of the different bios of the professors and felt that the one I chose was her experiences and the work that she did was similar to the work that I wanted to do. And so that's why I chose her. And once I was accepted, your application, that's something that you'll be asked in the application itself. So I filled that out. And then when I was accepted into the program, they matched us. But I have heard that you don't always get who you choose, but you can, once you're in the program, change your advisor. So just because you don't get them offhand doesn't mean that you won't get them again. And it could be that maybe that advisor is just working with a lot of students that year. But for me, since I was doing both programs at the same time, I spent about 4 years in school. So if you're not doing it in 1 year, or if you increase your semesters, then it's possible that even though you weren't paired with the person that you wanted initially, you can be paired with them later. I'm just reading your question to make sure I answer it in its entirety. And then in terms of, can you do a practicum in English? Yes, you definitely can. There are a lot of people who are in my program who didn't want to do a practicum in French, and that was fine. But I will say that there probably are more opportunities if you're bilingual, but if you're Anglophone, that's fine too. Like, you won't be at a disadvantage, I don't think.
All right, perfect. So I'm just gonna go on here. I lost my place. Okay. So we've got a question here. Okay, so I'm just gonna read it out because it's a little bit long, so I don't want to miss anything. I've done my whole BSW online and have been pretty isolated because I live far out. What do you recommend to keep in mind when transitioning to in-person for masters? And then there's a follow-up. How many assignments or how long roughly do you have per class? How long are you in class? So just like more logistical things.
I could tackle that one. So transitioning from online school to in-person, I would urge you to like do the little things that you see that are available at the beginning of the term. So like, like for me, it was an advanced practice seminar. There's some like social lunches and stuff like that. It's a really good way to like meet people informally. But also, if that's outside your comfort zone, just take it easy and go to class and you'll meet people organically. For someone like me who works quite a bit on top of my MSW, I didn't have a chance to do a lot of like the social stuff apart from that first week of school when I had originally moved to Toronto. But you're going to be working on group assignments together. You're going to be in class together. So just take it easy, meet people at your own comfortable pace, and don't overthink it, because really at the end of the day, the people you're going to meet in your masters are going to be friendly. Most people you meet in your BSW, I'm sure, are very friendly, but I think for people who apply to graduate school for social work and do a master of social work, like they're like-minded people, I'm sure you're going to get along great with them. So don't overthink it too much. In terms of the logistical questions you have, I think it's kind of depends on which school you go to. Most of my assignments are weighted pretty heavily, so there's only like 3 or 4 assignments max per class. In some classes, I only have 2 assignments, and then in class, I only have about 3 hours of class time per class per week. And then on top of that, you probably have to budget a few hours a night or so of, reading and working on assignments. So I hope that answers your question.
I would say it's the same for University of Windsor. I don't go to class every day, but I go basically every second Friday and Saturday. I go for 8:30 to 4:30 on Saturday and 3:30 to 9 on Friday. But the coursework is similar to what Tom described. There's like a midterm paper that's usually due somewhere in the middle of the class. It's probably like an essay, maybe 10 pages, maybe a little bit longer for the final one, probably weighted like 30 and 40%. Maybe there's a class presentation in the middle there somewhere, or a couple critical reflections that are worth 5 or 10 points each. So not an enormous amount of work, I would say, but like certainly weighted heavily. You don't want to be writing an essay that's worth 40% the night before at midnight and it not be good quality work, because your mark is going to reflect that. Also, for grad school, 70 is a pass, and you'll be on academic probation if you go under that for a period of time, like a semester, I think it is. So yeah, I would say you don't want to do things quick. If it was worth like 5% and it wasn't your highest quality work, you could probably live with the mark. But if it's worth 40%, you probably don't want that.
Sorry, I can't really speak to the first part about transitioning, because when 2020 hit, I was working on my independent study project. So I kind of isolated myself for that time. But then that was also at the end of the program, so I didn't go back. In terms of how many assignments, I would say at McGill's School of Social Work, it varies depending on the professor. So sometimes you'll have 2 big papers. I'm saying unfortunately because I don't necessarily like tests. There was one class where we had a test, and then we had a final paper that we had to do, and I couldn't get out of that class because it was a mandatory quantitative research class, but hopefully they've changed and taken that test out. Well, if you're like me and you don't like tests. But then some classes, they'll do things like every week. So let's say you have a reflection paper that you do maybe every 2 weeks or every week. That's worth a small percentage, and that goes towards your participation mark. Or I think this one was unique because it was couples counseling, but you had to film yourself kind of like role playing with other students. And that was something that had to be submitted pretty often. And then you would write, but I think this one was brief. You would write a reflection on how you did and things that you didn't expect, and what some of the challenges were. And it was tough being a counselor. Like I commend them.
I think your answers were very helpful. Okay, and then Stephanie just said, thank you so much for sharing. It's really difficult when it comes to power dynamics with people who hold the knowledge at these institutions. Really appreciate it a lot. And that was to the question previously. Okay, so we still have more questions, don't worry. Like I said before, if you have any more questions, whether it's about the application process, what courses are like in the master's program, anything else apart, even like, I guess we never really asked about what you guys are doing, like in terms of your work. So maybe we can learn a little bit more about that. So like in regards to social work, what type of work are you doing?
I could start. So I am if people live in Ottawa, they might be familiar with Youth Services Bureau. It's a social service agency working with youth 16 to 20. Well, 16 to 20. We have some programs for slightly older. So I am the coordinator at our downtown services and drop-in center. So we offer a drop-in center during the day, but we also have things like healthcare on site. We have dental hygiene on site. We have workers from the Royal. We have an ODSP liaison who's in Ontario Works come in. So we basically make it like a bit of a community hub.
Thank you. Rachelle, do you want to speak a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, I guess right now I'm on the law side of things and trying to make that work. But before that, a lot of my work was with youth. And so the first job that I actually had coming out of my bachelor was that I worked with young adults who had been unsuccessful in the traditional school system. And so it was at that's the Black Youth Network. So for those of you who know where that is, I was in charge of the education department. And so we had a distance model that we practiced. And so students were able to meet with one-on-one volunteer tutors that would help them kind of work through the course load. And then we also had a partnership with a local adult education center that would allow them to take their exams there. So that was pretty cool because they kind of got to go at their own pace. We cooked food for them. We tried to make it as comfortable as possible. Some would bring their children in and we tried to make sure that there was childcare available for them. So it was really nice. And even when I went back to school, I would get messages from people saying like, I got my high school finally. And so that was always awesome. And even when people would finish one class and it was like one class down, that was always a celebration too.
Thank you. Tom, you want to talk a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So while I'm doing my master's, my practicum is at Radius Child and Youth Services, which is an agency, a children's mental health agency here in Toronto that services children who have been victimized by sexual abuse, youth who have engaged in concerning sexualized behavior, or youth who have been charged with a sexual offense. So I'm working under the supervision of a clinical therapist, doing a comprehensive assessment and then treatment with these children and youth. Before coming to Toronto, I did a little bit of work in the shelter system. I worked at a harm reduction-based residential treatment program. So that's the only thing I'm doing in terms of work right now with my schedule in terms of practicum. I'm hoping to find a job doing some degree of clinical work when I'm done the program, but that's what I'm up to right now.
Thank you. And I was also wondering about, I don't know if you had anything else to talk about, Carleen, but I had a question. I don't think we talked a lot about what practicum is like. So is it similar to undergrad in the way that you have a minimum requirement of hours or a maximum amount of hours? And then like, what's like the matching process? Do you have to do it by yourself or does the school help you? Can you guys speak a little bit more about that? We can start with Stephen, please.
So that's actually one of the first things that the University of Windsor does is they set you up with a field placement supervisor. I don't know what the exact word is, something like that. But basically, I met with them quite early in September. I told them my wish list of places I'd like to work or do my practicum. We'll probably meet again in a month or so and The school basically sets it up for you. They actually ask you not to reach out to different places on your own. They have connections for the most part. I think it's like 750 hours. I'm doing the advanced class, like it's actually 14 months at University of Windsor. I think it's 750 hours. It's from September 6th to December 6th, so it's roughly 3 months, full-time or almost full-time. So yeah, it's a pretty heavy, it's definitely like a lot of work, I would imagine. I haven't done it yet though.
Thank you. Rachelle, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So at McGill, it's similar. You have your placement, your field advisor, I think, who will place you. You have a list of all of the organizations that have agreed to take on a student for the upcoming year. Some people will tie it to their independent study project. Some people won't. You have the opportunity of taking it during one semester or over 2 semesters, or you can do a block placement, which is what I did during the summer, and just kind of did it, I think, 4 days a week. I can't remember the exact amount of hours that you have to do, but I would say, no, I'm sorry, I really don't remember.
That's okay. We can do our own research and find out more about that as well. Tom, can you talk a little bit more about your experience?
Yeah, U of T has what's called the Practicum Administration System. It's called the PASS. It's like a database website where you can see all of the available practicums with your given field of study, and you can read through them all and see if they fit with your interests and logistically where you are in the GTA, because the GTA is huge, and if you live in the East End, you won't be going to a practicum in the West End. And then essentially you give them your top 3 or 5 choices, and then based on your choices, they'll provide you with, a match. And then once you get your match, you can you reach out to the agency for an interview. If the interview goes well, you move along. If you don't like your interview, or if you don't do well in your interview for whatever reason, which I'm sure doesn't happen very often, then they put you back on the pass and you find something else. But there is quite a one of the main sells, I think, of the U of T program is the vast practicum options that there are.
One of the other questions actually a lot of my classmates had is, are you able to do your placement somewhere that you currently work? So the University of Windsor is actually agreeable to it, but you cannot be doing the same role that you're doing. So if, just say you're a frontline worker and you're doing your math, so just say I'm like, I'm working at a drop-in center. Well, the agency I work for also has like a mental health section where you do like psychotherapy or you do counseling. So you could transition over there for either paid or unpaid work, and it would be and they would be agreeable to it. But there's a couple things though. They generally want your field placement supervisor to have a master's of social work or above. They might make some exceptions for it, but they try not to. So that's another one of the things. If you're working somewhere and you want to do your placement there, maybe in a different program or a different, floor of the building, for example, doing something different, you're going to want to make sure that you're able to match yourself up with somebody who has the credentials to really foster your learning.
I know that McGill, you do have a list of places that say that they will take on a student. But if you do find a place that's willing to take you on, that can be an option as well.
No, that's amazing. I think that one of the biggest points of either like contention in the social work program is often about the practicums and how they work and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely think that people appreciate kind of getting the layout of that. I'm looking. I don't see any other questions, but I'm not sure if I'm missing anything. Just gonna go through here.
No, I think we answered all the questions, but I do have one more question before we ask our final question that we had skipped previously. Just in terms of self-care. So how have you been taking care of yourself during your program?
I think for me, I mean, I think it's like you could build in self-care as long as you prioritize your time extremely well. If you are going to set your schedule up really busy and then cram all your assignments in the last week, you're going to burn yourself out pretty quickly. So I try to actually just like balance things, like I say no to different things. Like I work full time as well, but I certainly like plan my weeks out pretty far in advance to give myself like evenings free or like a Sunday free with like no school, no work. So you definitely got to like put in one, in my opinion, you have to put in one day a week where you don't have to do school. So try to get your assignments done or your readings up to a reasonable level before that one day off, so you can give yourself one day a week without thinking about school.
I would agree and echo what Steven says. I like to have a time during the week or during the day, if that's even possible, where I'm just doing something that I like and that energizes me and I have that alone time. But on the flip side, I also like to spend time with people who see me as just like Rachelle, not Rachelle, the law student, not Rachelle, the social worker. Because I feel like there's not so many arenas that you could be in and just truly be yourself and just like really get to relax, but still be in the presence of people. So I feel like I've really come to appreciate that, especially with the pandemic when we were all isolated in our own homes and we didn't really get to see our people as often as we wanted to. I came to really appreciate those people where I felt like I could just come into their presence and just be me and not feel like I had to put a persona on.
Yeah, I like fully agree with what Stephen and Rachelle have said. I especially like the point that you said, Rachelle, about, you know, finding a space where you can take off your social work hat per se and just be with people as your authentic self without any professional obligations or duties in that sense. And it just finding something that's going to bring you connection and relaxation throughout the week in a healthy way is really important, because it is a lot to manage, especially if you're working, especially if you you know, take on a practicum at the same time as your studies. Just finding time, and even if you have to like not do a week's or like 1 week of readings for one of your classes in order to, you know, give yourself some time to yourself, it'll be worth it in the long run, because burnout occurs and it's not good.
Yeah, and also say like burnout in the social work field, it's not just the pure volume of work, but think about the work that we do on a particular day, right? It's like constant trying to support people in difficult times of crisis in their life. Or, I mean, like Tom said, you know, being a, you know, like seeing youth who have been, you know, victims of sexual assault, like that is not easy to see. So even if you have to really make sure that it's impossible not to like take it home a little bit, but you have to make sure that you're doing a good job of like boundarying yourself, so your work life is not your whole life, because then you'll find yourself burned out pretty quickly.
No, absolutely. I think it's a really important discussion to have, just because we see burnout time and time again. So definitely making that known. I'm just gonna go back to, because I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I'm gonna go back to our final kind of question that we left for the end to kind of wrap it up here. So what advice do you have from your personal experience for those who are interested in applying to the MSW program? I know we've touched on this kind of in different parts, but just to kind of tie everything together, what advice would you give?
I would say if you want to make the commitment if you want to make the commitment, just do it. There's not an enormous amount to lose. The cost isn't enormous to apply to school. The worst that they can say is no. Your referees will have to spend an hour or so writing a reference. But if you really want to pursue this, I would say apply to a couple different schools that interest you, that have, similar values, and they teach things that you want to know about. So yeah, I would say apply to different schools. There's a lot of competition in these schools. I think, B used to be like, if you have a B, you can apply, then it was B plus. Now the schools that had B plus are now A minus. So I would say get like your application ready well in advance, apply to a couple different schools, and make sure that you can prioritize it in your life. A master's of social work certainly can't be like an off the desk kind of endeavor that you pursue. It has to be probably your biggest commitment.
Absolutely. Tom, Rachelle, if there's anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, I would say don't self-select out. Like, even if you're looking through the criteria, and I think it was Tom that talked about it before, is they might ask for something, but you don't know what their pool of candidates looks like that year. So just go for it. And I think it was Stephen who said, like, if they say no, they say no. It's not the worst thing that happens. Of course, it hurts, but I'm sure that there would be another program that would love to have you.
Yeah, I think both of you make really good points. I would also I think it's pretty much identical to what Stephen said, but just go for it. There's no harm in applying. And, even just taking the step to apply, you don't have to make your decision until, depending on the school, I believe you don't have to make most of the decisions until like well into next year. So like April or May in a lot of cases, because it'll take them some time to get back to you. So you'll have all that time to kind of decide if it's really what's right for you. And if you apply to multiple schools, you'll have time to triage and see which one is the one that you want to do. But if you're thinking about it, if you're on the fence about it, just do it.
Like Nike said, Nike sponsored. Okay, well, I want to thank all of our guests for being here. We really appreciate you spending your evening with us, considering how busy you all are. We really appreciate you coming in and talking to us about your experience and what you've learned and mistakes you have learned from. So this is the end of our event. Thank you everybody for coming, and we will it will be recorded, and so we'll post it on our YouTube. I'm not sure if we mentioned that before. So this will be posted up on our YouTube channel. So if you want to look at it again, and if you missed something, then you have a chance to review it. So thank you everyone, and have a good night.
Thanks so much, everyone. And to our speakers, you'll see all the thank yous kind of echoed in the comments. So your time is very, very appreciated.
It's nice talking to you. Take care.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
I was gonna offer my email, but I guess everybody's gone now. So
we will send Danny, if you want to stop the recording.
Yeah.